ever felt suspended between two worlds? I have. I'm half Greek and I'm half Anglo, I guess you would say. You can see it reflected in my name. My first name is Constantine, Konstantinos. That's Greek. My last name is Campbell, that's Anglo. And though I was born and raised in Australia, my Greek heritage has always been a part of my identity. But you know, whenever I'm with real Greeks, I don't feel very Greek. I feel more Anglo when I'm with them. You know, my modern Greek skills are not very good. My ancient Greek is a lot better. But then when I'm with Anglos, I don't feel very Anglo. I kind of feel Greek because I love Kalamata olives and feta cheese and that sort of stuff. And that's raised a question for me at various times in my life. Is it okay to prefer one half of my heritage over the other? You know, when I was growing up, I really didn't want to be Greek, and I ignored my Greekness, and I didn't tell people about it. I just pushed it to one side. But as I've got older, I've kind of leaned more into my mother's Greek heritage. But is that okay? Is it okay to prefer one over the other, or is it better to hold the two together in tension? Tension. This morning I want to speak about a different kind of tension, a tension that all Christians face. But sometimes we will want to resolve the tension in one direction or the other. But I want to suggest to you this morning the right thing to do is to hold the tension, because it is a holy tension. It is a tension worth celebrating. So what is this tension? Well, we find it in the Apostle Peter's first letter, in the very first verse of his first letter. In two words, he describes his readers as chosen sojourners. Chosen sojourners. Now, most translations today will have maybe exiles instead of sojourners, but I think that's not the best translation. I think they prefer exile because, well, no one knows what a sojourner is anymore. And exile is so hip right now. Everyone wants to be an exile. But exile is not the paradigm that Peter is working with. He's not speaking about Israel having been expelled out of the promised land. He has more in mind someone like Abraham, who has left his homeland and is sojourning his way to a new home, a promised land. That's what a sojourner is. Someone who is on their way to their true home. Now, in the ancient world, sojourners were typically disadvantaged. They were economically disadvantaged. They were socially disadvantaged. They were often made to feel like aliens. They were not welcome. They were ostracized. It is a term of disadvantage. A little like a refugee today, living away from home, maybe pining for their home, and not necessarily welcome where they are currently located. Peter refers to his Christian readers as sojourners, but he also refers to them as chosen. And this is a term of extraordinary privilege. The chosen people of God, the nation of Israel in the Old Testament, Christians in the New, have been handpicked by him to belong to him, the creator of the universe. This is being in the inmost group in the universe. And what's interesting is the way that Peter puts these two terms together side by side. Chosen, a term of extraordinary privilege, and sojourners, a term of disadvantage. In fact, until Peter writes this sentence, these two words are not found anywhere in Jewish and Christian literature, because they are not words that naturally go together. They jar against each other. They kind of form an oxymoron, like a wealthy hobo, or a royal outcast, or a fun run. These chosen sojourners live in a tension of privilege and disadvantage. Now, the thing is, the early church really latched on to this part of their identity. They really saw themselves as chosen sojourners. And you can see that reflected very early in the history of the church with Clement, who's the Bishop of Rome, in his first letter to the church in Corinth, round about AD 96. The address of the letter reads like this: "From the church that sojourns in Rome to the church that sojourns in Corinth." Do you see that? The church in Rome, they may have lived there their whole lives, but Rome is not their home. They are sojourners in Rome. And the church in Corinth, they are sojourning in Corinth because their true home is heaven. We are just sojourners while we live here on this earth. And it seems to me that the contemporary church has lost sight a little bit of this part of our identity. Do we think of ourselves as the church that sojourns in Chicago, the church that sojourns in America, the church that sojourns on planet Earth? Are you a chosen sojourner? Do you think of yourself that way? Well, as I mentioned before, we are tempted to try to resolve this tension between being chosen and being sojourners. What happens if you lean into your chosen status? Well, what can happen is you can exalt in your privilege. And you can use your privileged status of being chosen as a way to oppress other people. We are the chosen people of God. You are not. We reign with Christ. You do not. We are the true church. You are not. And that is a recipe for tyranny. For nearly 1,000 years, the Holy Roman Empire ruled over most of Europe. And at the center of power stood the church. No longer was the church an underground movement, ostracized, persecuted, alienated from the culture around about. Now they're at the very center of things, calling all the shots. Palaces were built. Thrones were gilded. Crowns were cast. And murder, intrigue, and betrayal were abundant. Atrocities were committed in the name of the church. Because the church forgot that this is not our home. And so it built a kingdom for itself here on earth. But you know, we can do a similar thing in our own lives today. I originally trained to be a professional jazz musician. And I had to work out, how do I be a chosen sojourner in the jazz world? Because on the one hand, music is a gift from God. It's a privilege. It's a good thing. It's right to want to fan into flame that gift of God. But how do I do that and avoid creating my own kingdom here on earth, chasing after fame and glory and accomplishment, those things? Or what about in the workplace? Work is a good gift from God. It's a privilege to be able to work. And we should pour our time and energy into our work. But then all of a sudden we get caught up chasing after promotions and wealth and power and prestige. Again, creating a kingdom for ourselves here on earth. Or what about politics? You know, many Christians think that America is the new Israel, the promised land of God. Now, to be sure, America has experienced many blessings. It is a privileged nation. But is it God's kingdom here on earth? No, of course not. But sometimes we think that it is. We build a kingdom for ourselves, forgetting that we belong to another place. Do you think of yourself as a sojourner? Or what happens if you lean into your sojourning, into that half of the identity? Well, it's good. You're very conscious that this is not your home. You're on your way to another place. You don't really belong here. But because you're so conscious of that, you maybe bend over backwards trying to fit into the world around you. You start to speak the same way as everyone else. You spend your time the same way as everyone else. You spend your money the same way as everyone else. And before you know it, you just blend in to the world around you. You become a covert sojourner. But again, the early church can help us here. Did the early church change the world by just blending in to everyone, to the world around them? No. They couldn't be more different from Rome. They took care of the poor, the sick, the marginalized, the widows and the orphans. Whereas Rome neglected all those people because they believed that they were suffering the consequences for offending the gods. They deserved it. So the Christians stood out. The Christians valued serving other people, whereas Rome valued self-gratification. The Christians valued humility, whereas Rome valued glory and pride. The Christians forgave their enemies. Rome killed their enemies. The Christians died for the sake of Christ, and Rome killed them for the sake of Christ. Christians were misunderstood. They were hated to begin with. But over time, their reputation for humility and love and service grew, so that it came to the point where the pagan Emperor Julian in the 4th century wrote, "The Christians take care of not only their own poor, but ours as well. And everyone knows that we don't do anything for our own poor." And so the example of the church put Rome to shame and started to change the culture around them. See, the Christians made a difference by being different. They remembered that they were chosen by God, that they belonged to Him, and so therefore they should stand out from the world around them. I began by speaking about my Greek Anglo heritage. I've come to the conclusion that the right thing to do is to hold these two things in tension. Though it can be awkward sometimes, though I don't feel truly at home in one or the other, it is a good tension. And they inform each other, and I have something to contribute to both worlds. And really I've learnt this from example from my Greek Australian uncle, my Uncle Nick. Whenever he's explaining the Greek origin of certain English words, he sounds very Greek. But whenever he's criticizing Australian politics or Australian culture, he sounds very Australian. It's not one or the other for him, it's both and. And so it is for us. We are chosen sojourners. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "If you study history, you will find that the Christians who did most for this present world were the ones who thought most about the next world. And it is precisely because we have forgotten that next world that we have become so ineffective in this one." If you want to make a difference in this world, you must live for the next world. Where is your allegiance? Do you realize you're just passing through? You want to make a difference for Christ on the way? Or are you kind of blending in, fitting in with the world around you? The answers to these questions will change everything. It'll change the way you spend your time, the way you spend your money, the way you spend your energy. It'll change the way you relate to other people, the way you speak, the way you love. So go. Change everything. Thank you.